here. And recording. So many thanks. We're gonna jump right into it. I'll let you know a little bit about Design Spaces first. Our mission is to amplify equitable innovation. We continue to meet and bring world-class authors and speakers, and we like to also create new spaces and initiatives for growth, learning, and connecting. If you want to stay up with the latest initiatives for Design Spaces, you could, or to kind of get on the list for when this next event comes our way, you can go ahead and subscribe here. We are happy to see you. Design Spaces likes to pay it forward in our community, both local and global. So this month, on Cheryl's request, we are featuring Shanti Bhavan, a nonprofit that empowers children from India's lowest socioeconomic class to break the cycle of generational poverty. So if you'd like to make a direct donation, we will, I'm going to drop the link in here really quick for you. Feel free to do that. You can also purchase a ticket on our event site. We do pay it forward donation tickets for sure. So if you'd rather do that and kind of give us a little cheer, Design Spaces will be making a donation. So feel free to do that as well. Purchase as many as you'd like. And now I want to jump into it and welcome our special guest speaker today, Cheryl Platz. Cheryl is a world-renowned designer, author, actress, and speaker whose work on emerging technologies has reached hundreds of millions of customers across multiple industries. Her professional passions include natural user interfaces, applied storytelling in design and research, and taming complexity in any manifestation. We're going to talk today about Cheryl's first book, Design Beyond Devices, Creating Multimodal Cross-Device Experiences. It was published this year by Rosenfeld Media, many thanks to them, in December of 2020. Welcome, Cheryl.
Thank you for the welcome. Then hello, everybody in Design Spaces. I'm so glad to be here with you. I'm going to take a moment to share my screen. Hopefully you can see that. And yeah, let's get started. So today I mentioned for the folks who were earlier in chat, this is a book club format. So we're going to assume that folks have peeked at the book, maybe looked at it, read through some of it, maybe completed it, but that doesn't mean that you can't get anything out of this if you just tuned in and you're like, I'm curious about the book. But the focus is not going to be covering the content inside, but rather the focus is going to be talking about what you can do with the content from the book. I will cover a few of the basics. So thank you for that introduction, and let's get started. So we're going to talk. I'm going to talk about the definitions and theme review for the book, the terms that folks coming in cold would need to kind of appreciate this conversation. And then I want to talk about three things we can do with the book: capturing customer context, working with stakeholders, and evaluating potential ideas that we want to work with. So definitions. This book, in the subtitle, it's Creating Multimodal Cross-Device Experiences. So what is multimodality? Bill Buxton and I agree that the future is multimodal because humans are multimodal. And a mode in this context is a type of communication, and humans communicate using their senses. So a multimodal interaction in the terms of the digital world is an exchange between a device and a human being where multiple input or output modalities can be used simultaneously or sequentially based on customer context and preference. And so our devices are capable of so much. And in some cases, we are doing multimodal things. This is a multimodal interaction. You're listening to me speak, you're watching my slides. The computer's throwing multiple modes of output at you at once. But are you interacting with your computer as the input multimodal? Not always. So communication modalities that we talk about in the book, 5 categories. Some of them will be very rote for folks here. Visual, we're projecting stimulus that'll be interpreted over optical channels. So pictures and books and things like that. We have auditory signals. So that most people think of speech now, thanks to Alexa, but that can also be music or sound effects. Those are also auditory forms of output or input in the case of the clapper. Haptic communication modalities communicate meaning with changes to the physical environment. So I'm giving haptic feedback to PowerPoint when I press buttons on my handy dandy presentation clicker. But it doesn't have to be direct manipulation necessarily. It can be vibration, like force. It could be even there's air interactions. It's a very haptic is a very interesting space. And then the last two categories are the ones that people are probably less familiar with, less working with less in their day-to-day work. Kinetic communication is communication based on movement or orientation. And the best way for me to explain this to you is the difference between a mouse click and mouse movement, or a pen tap and pen movement. The tap or the click, it's just the destination that matters. You had to move the mouse to get to the destination, but you don't actually care whether you made any loop-de-loops to get there. All you cared about was the point. But when we're communicating kinetically, it is the motion that matters. There's a message in the motion. And so obviously the Xbox Kinect is a example of kinetic input modality and interaction with the system where you're communicating your intent with motion. And the last category is the squishiest, and you don't hear it talked about a lot, the ambient category. And so this one I define as inferred meaning driven by environmental or biometric conditions. So in a way, it's kind of putting your intent in a bank. You tell a system what you want it to do when certain conditions occur, and then later, based on your presence or conditions that it detects based on sensors, an interaction occurs. And this also, I also use this category to refer to some of the less tangible human senses like smell or touch, like the interactions that we can't really grasp or see or even really tangibly describe. So multimodal design is the coordination of the delivery of these multiple output and input stimuli in the attempt to create a flexible, coherent experience for our customers. You can design with these things today. People are designing with these two things today, but the goal of the book is to help get us kind of working with these things in tandem to make it more meaningful and useful for our customers, and hopefully more inclusive. Multimodal design as a practice is an additional layer of design rigor on top of the design techniques you already know. So you're still going to need to do full voice user interface design or natural user interface designs or graphical interface designs. I forgot to write on the slide, but you're going to need to do all of those things still. So not all the skills you have are still relevant. Good news. This is just more complexity and more job security. And the reason I included cross-device experiences in the book, which made it a little bit longer than we originally discussed, was that it's short-sighted to assume that any experience exists in a vacuum. Our customers are swimming in devices, and I could spend a year designing a killer app for a smart speaker, but if my customer's phone is closest to them, there's no guarantee they'll ever decide to go to the smart speaker. Like, we have to understand that customers are going to make contextual choices and that they're not fixed in place, that they're moving fluidly. And the more we can bring their experience between these devices to support those contextual changes and understand the reason for those contextual changes, the more powerful our experiences are going to be. So the book itself can be divided into 4 themes. They don't go in order. They're kind of, oh, that's interesting. The host disabled participant screen sharing. So if you folks want to see, if one of the hosts can re-enable that, that would be lovely.
Enabled.
Okay, thank you. So the 4 themes, they're not sequential in the book, but they're woven throughout. And so we have customer context and ethics, understanding what your customer needs, what they're surrounded by, what systems they're a part of, and how your chosen solution is going to impact them. The second theme is multimodal frameworks. So that's how do we do this? What how do we think about this? How do we take human behavior and then apply these different modalities and have the computer communicate in sort of a polite way with people? These are complex problems, and frameworks help simplify these problems for folks. In the introduction, it was mentioned that I like taming complexity, and the frameworks help you tame complexity. The ideation and execution category is techniques for dealing with the blank page problem. many of the types of problems this book describes are unsolved. And I've been there where you're like, oh, okay, just no ideas. We're just totally starting from scratch. And so, we need to talk about how do you show the transitions between modalities? How do you communicate the need for your experience to stakeholders? And that's what ideation and execution is all about. And then emerging technology, because when we work with these new inputs, inevitably we're going to be working with artificial intelligence. Computer vision, voice user interfaces, they are powered by artificial intelligence, and those entities, those techniques are subject to bias. They are complex technologies. They can be intimidating, and it's important to demystify them. Similarly, when you talk about these new interaction techniques, extended reality often comes up. And so I want to prepare designers for the inevitable direction the industry is going. But what comes after the final page? So that's what's in the book. But how do you start putting these concepts into practice? So I mentioned we're going to talk about 3 themes for what comes next. And the first one is getting context for informed design choices. Before you can begin, you need to know more than you probably did before when starting a design project, because we could make assumptions when we were designing for a traditional office context, certainly before COVID, about the way a traditional desk environment or open plan workplace worked and how people's relationship with their devices worked. But, from the Echo to automotive and smartwatches to TVs, like not all multimodal experiences are created equal. Like your expectations for the device that's sitting in your kitchen with the screen are much different than the potato chip can Echo device that's sitting in your living room. So how do you choose the right interaction model? I found, and this is another thing that we cover in the book, but just as a bit of a review, there are 2 dimensions of your customer's context that I've found drive that choice, like where in the spectrum of multimodal interaction models you probably want to consider going. And one of those is how rich the information is. If you have low information density, like sports scores or the current temperature versus high density, like a video or an ebook, there's certain experiences that work well for things on either end of those spectrum, and it is a spectrum. The other question is what is the relationship between the customer and the device? Are they typically in close proximity, like arm's reach? It's a watch or a phone, or are they more likely to be at long range, like 3 to 10 feet? Because if they're at long range, there are assumptions we cannot make about the relationship between the customer and the device, specifically that they cannot touch the device and they cannot see the device all the time. Sometimes they might be able to, but not all the time. And that changes the way we handle our interaction models. So once we have that context, then we can place what's going to work best for our customers on this spectrum of multimodality. And I'm not going to go into this in detail since many of you have already reviewed the book, but we've got these 4 quadrants. The thing is, we've got to go and get that context in order to place our customers on this spectrum. So to understand what interaction model makes sense in the moment, we need to understand, are our customers running around? Are they touching a remote, or are they interacting with the media center without a remote that's far away in a public space? Are they in a crazy dynamic environment like their home kitchen, or is it something a bit more controlled? Are they in a living room where there's a bunch of people, or it's just their bedroom where it's just one person? And most of our assumptions about the way the world works changed since March 2020. Like office environments, education, public transportation, travel, family gatherings, all those rules changed. So even if you did have a really great understanding of how this worked for your customers before, we probably don't now. So the good news is job security again. It's a really interesting time to go and learn things. So in the book, I talked about Crow, the storytelling shorthand we use at my improv theater, Unexpected Productions, to quickly define the essential elements of a scene: character, relationship, objective, and where. And we go into much more detail about these in the book. But I have an interview guide on my site, on the Idea Platz site, for folks who are looking to put together interviews to just start exploring with customers, to get at this type of context that they may not have. Now, for experienced user experience researchers, this may be, you've got this, you don't need this. But I found a lot of folks that I talk to are designers without researchers, or product managers or devs who are trying to get some context, or they're trying to do this stuff quickly, and I've also found that folks who do have a background in user research, some of them are like, some of these questions I would not have thought to ask. Like it's engaging customers in a different way. So this is organized with the inspiration of that crow. So we've got the first section is questions around character. Second section is questions around device, the relationship with the device. Third section is relationship with the product and products in general. Fourth section is objectives, and fifth section is what's going on in their environment. And the good news is many of the questions you're going to want to ask are similar regardless of the context. We're trying to learn more about the context, but only the follow-up questions are going to change. So I've gone through this in workshops, and it's led to some pretty interesting insights for people after just a few moments. But once you've gathered that context, so let's say you've had that interesting conversation, you've looked at things in a different way, you added a few new questions to an existing interview guide so that you could understand their environment a little bit better and their objectives a little bit better, because you're trying to go cross-platform and you're trying to understand why they would switch devices. Now you have this extra customer context and you're motivated to add some extra capabilities to your devices. Your stakeholders are probably going to be a little skeptical, especially if what you're asking is expensive. So how do you convince them? Because they didn't come along in those interviews with you. It's not uncommon to encounter this skepticism. And I've found that there are two common forms of skepticism. There is the defensive, we already know our customers defensiveness, where, they've been doing this for years. They like to be perceived as an expert. And they are a little upset that you're coming to them and telling them that they have some sort of unrealized blank spot in their understanding. For them, well, we'll talk about that in a second. The other big category is we can already do this today with an app. And you can see that argument being made very easily for the original Echo. Like the most common things you could do with the Echo were timers and play music. These are things you could do with an app. And so why would you invest 20, 30, I don't know exactly how much it cost to make the Echo, but I'm pretty sure it was at least dozens of millions of dollars when you could do it with a phone. The reason you would choose to do it with the Echo is because you've seen customers in their kitchens with their hands covered in butter, and you know that having a hands-free timer is valuable to them. But you have to tell that story to your stakeholders. But how do you get them to let go of their outdated knowledge for those folks in the first column? I find that shared understanding workshops help to generate buy-in by gathering the sum total of the group's knowledge. Many times when folks, this is my personal experience, but when stakeholders say like, we already know our customers, it feels like we've started a guessing game. Like they have a pool of understanding about their customer and they expect you to kind of try to hit it. And they, in some ways, they want to be heard. And for me, I want to get all that knowledge out on a table and then show that yes, many of those things are true and there's more things we need to learn. But unless we've acknowledged that, unless we've gotten them to share all of the things they think they know about their customers, we can't say which ones are no longer true and which ones are true and which things we still have to ask. So a shared understanding workshop with the goals of helping people understand that either we need to invest in some expanded customer research to figure out whether we need a new approach to multimodality or cross-device experiences, or to support potentially a new project. I would say that the session goals are everyone leaves with the same basic knowledge, our gaps in understanding are identified, and our stakeholders feel heard. And the general session agenda that I recommend is starting with a review of existing knowledge, which can be done offline if you're really or time constrained, an ideation and exploration phase, and analysis and synthesis phase. It'll sound very familiar to many of you who are familiar with design thinking exercises. But with your stakeholders, you want to frame this like this. You want to make sure they understand that in this phase, the goal of the session is not to solve the problem. We want to understand our customers and the human context in which the potential problems occur. And we're also working to make sure everyone on the team has the same information about our customer insights so that we can speak the same language and make smart decisions about research and product priorities as a group. No more holding on to knowledge, no more saying we know our customers. Great, what do we know? What do we know? And then once we know what we know what we don't know. So I've created a few job aids for you, depending on whether your folks work better on paper or whether they work better on a tool like Mural. So I have printable worksheets for folks who these were created in the before times, but these customer context worksheets. There's one for where folks kind of share some of the constraints about the problem. If we talk about what potential problem has brought us together. And we talk about what existing research we believe has been completed. We talk about, the second one is about visualizing context. So we're trying to get our stakeholders to picture what our customers are doing. We're trying to, storyboarding is such a valuable tool for getting folks out of their head and saying like, oh, that's why we can't use an app, because they don't have their phone near them. Oh, all right. Capturing Crow, that this one is about having folks dive into each of these different elements and contribute what we know. And there may be places we can't fill in bits, and that's where maybe we need to direct our research. And then I've got this open research questions worksheet where we can check off the things for like the challenge questions I have in the book that you know the answers to once you've piled all your research on the table and gone through these exercises, and circle the ones you still need to go and chase after. But if that doesn't work for you on paper, I've also created a mural template that you can go and work with. This is designed for either 6 individuals or 6 groups to work with. And it's broken up into the same sort of phases. So there's a shared understanding phase and a visualization phase and so on and so forth. So both of these resources are also available on the Idea Platz site, and I'll show you how to get to that at the end of this little bit. And that last group, or the last thing I wanted to talk to you about next steps, or stakeholders. What about the folks who think the phone is enough, for example? I just want to reiterate the importance of storyboarding. And I talk about storyboarding in the book, but it's so important, like some form. You can also use like videos of your participants. There are other forms of bringing that context to your stakeholders, but this is one of the first obstacles you're going to encounter, is bringing the context to life for your stakeholders. Storyboards help you set the stage, start the debate, gain support for the cause, and create and maintain a shared vision throughout your product team. On the Echo Look, we had binders with the original storyboards in, and we would post them around the room when new employees would come. We'd post-it note questions on them. They were this like shared, literal, physical shared vision. Physical isn't so much a thing we can do anymore, but we can still create shared vision for folks, even when the thing we're making is not yet tangible. So a reminder for folks about what a good UX storyboard is. Now, this is subjective, but for me, this is what has worked. It's focused on one or more users of the product, not the product itself. It supports one of these goals, either context for a scenario or exploring potential interaction issues. If it's just describing a perfect day, I've heard stories of specific CEOs who like to wear vests and things, getting pretty mad when storyboards show up on their desk and it's just magic. They want you to bring up the problems. They want to know that you're going in eyes open. It's fairly technology agnostic, like especially if you're early on. The earlier you are in the process, focus more on the people and not about the tech. And the customer's context or circumstances change over time. And remember, it's not art, it's customer context. Your stakeholders haven't seen the nuances of the customer experience that make it a natural user interface. Your goal is to use just enough technique to get that text across. Using stock photos, fine. Using sketches on top of stock photos, fine. Using pen drawings on blank paper that you scanned in, fine. Whatever it takes. That you're just, and honestly, like if you read Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics, which is an excellent book, the rough sketchiness of it is probably working in our favor because it's helping people project themselves into the story more than a fully rendered piece. The last thing I want to talk to you about next steps before we go into Q&A is how we identify the right problems to solve and ensure we're solving them correctly. And for this, I want to talk about the two of the frameworks I introduced in the book for examining the implications of our work. So one of the frameworks I discussed was in chapter 15. So internet culture, a couple years ago, you would post about doing something incredible and someone would say pics or it didn't happen. For us, when we're considering whether or not we should do something, where we have this great idea, I contest that it PICS or it shouldn't happen, where PICS stands for problem, inclusion, change, and systems. And so, this can even come before we're doing shared understanding workshops, but honestly, the ordering is probably like, let's figure out what we know about the customer so that we can answer some of these questions. And then once we know enough about the customer and the systems in which they live, then we can ask ourselves some really hard questions about whether we should move forward with this project. And the PICS stands for problem, inclusion, change, and systems. And there's a ton more challenge questions in the book, and you can ask yourselves whatever challenge questions you want, but we want to make sure that we're solving a worthwhile problem. And I ask some questions that you may not want to answer, like, is there a better use of this time and energy? Especially at big companies, like you can redirect those resources to another project, another feature on the same project. It's tough to be objective on things like this, especially when it's your baby, but the world is going through a lot of a lot of upheaval, and your intelligence and your capability is so precious. Is it really the right problem? Because it's important that we're solving the right problems. Inclusion, are you both your team including the right perspectives, and are you equipped to actually listen to the perspectives that you are including? Your theory of change, what might success and failure look like? Not just disrupting, but what is actually the result of the change going to look like? And thinking about not just your product, but the systems that your product lives within and how they are probably going to be impacted. And that includes things like institutionalized racism or other forms of systemic discrimination. The other tool we have is optipessimism. Now, this is more useful once we've decided to move forward with the project, and we're trying to figure out what the scope of the project is, like what features to work on, what to prioritize. So the four sort of guidelines for optipessimistic design were: consider the human context, design for the best case, plan for the worst case, and be ready to adapt in the moment. So what I want to point out here is that PICS is more about figuring out whether we should work on the problem, and optipessimism is figuring out, are we solving the problem in the correct way? Like, have we figured out, are we preparing for a situation where a product takes off and goes viral and it becomes a monster? Like, have we put guardrails in place? Like, what do we have? Feedback mechanisms? Do we have a kill switch we can bring in if our chatbot starts becoming a crazy racist? Even success can come at a cost, but it's so much cheaper and safer to think about those things and use our creativity as a strength earlier in the process. And then, so that's what designing for the best case is. And then planning for that worst case is like looking for those metrics, instrumenting your product. Those are decisions you also need to make pretty early on. Like, how are you going to track that things are going the way you want them to? And how are you going to find out when you need to intervene? That's how we get more responsible products that do less harm. Because edge cases now, when we've got millions and millions of customers, impact thousands and thousands of people, and they can do that in very significant ways. So all the concepts covered in the book fit together to give you an end-to-end process for multimodal and cross-device design. So you don't need to read this, but this is sort of how I see all the chapters fitting together, from a phase where you're discovering opportunities to a phase where you're evaluating potential technologies, which is kind of an extra bonus phase when you're working at the cutting edge, where you're like, what do I use? Do I use like weird force feedback stuff, or which input technology do I use? The envisioning and exploring phase, and the phase where we're delivering our designs to our partners. And as I tell folks outside the software industry, I hope this book will be the design manual for folks who want to design the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. And that is the answer to the question when I asked what was the nerdiest thing on my cover. You may notice that on the slide here, the excerpt from my art on my cover, in the very lower left-hand corner, there's this little pink circle with the red box, and the black box is an abstract Jean-Luc Picard. And when I gave my sort of inspiration for the book to the cover artist, I said, this is what I said. And I said, like, they're like, what inspires you for the book? I'm like, I don't know, like the LCARS interface from Star Trek, from The Next Generation. So Captain Picard is on my cover. And that took me a while to figure out. So you can visit the book site online at bit.ly/DBD-IdeaPlatz, or just go to ideaplatz.com and head to About Us, Design Beyond Devices. All these tools are there. There's some other things for download as well, lots of podcasts and stuff. If you want a free signed book plate, because I can't do book signings because pandemic, you can email a name and mailing address to Cheryl@ideaplatz.com. I don't use that contact information for any other purpose. If you want my IdeaPlatz newsletter, you have to go subscribe to that separately. But feel free to take me up on that if you like. I will send that to you, and have fun at the final frontier. So let's do Q&A. I'll leave that up for a second while I'm pulling up the chat.
Fantastic. Thank you, Cheryl.
Yeah, so yes,
Woo!
put it in the chat, Cheryl.
And feel free, you may raise your hand too. If there's anything you want to just come out with, that's great. It was a lot of information in a short time. So do many of you actually work with multimodal devices already? You could raise hand or something like that.
My guess is a lot of folks don't yet. Like that has been my consistent experience. And that's why I focus on like this beginning of the process. Oh, Alina says, yes, awesome. Yay.
Nice.
And Christy does too. Oh, awesome. Hey, maybe things are catching up. That's great. I like that. That is good. I have so many questions. What are you doing? What's it like? Oh, see, now I wish we were all in the same space so we could talk about it. Do I have any examples of clever or well-executed cross-device experiences? Well, I've had some folks describe experiences to me where, you know, they're working on their washer and they're able to set up notifications that go to their watch and get interrupted while they're watching a movie. I think I'm really compelled. I'm a little biased, but I'm really compelled by some of the stuff that happens at Disney. Between the Magic Band and the use of the phone and the use, like there's the readers in the parks, and they use it'll interact with you on rides and stuff by scanning your bands. There's some stuff that's there's a lot of ambient interactions that are happening that with the sort of near field readers and far field readers. There's some things that you use your phone for, your tickets. And so there's a lot of cross device stuff, phone to like mobile ordering and phone to Magic Band, phone, like all kinds of stuff. They also have some challenges, but I've always, you know, I was like, it's research going there, right? Yeah, it's totally research about the things that are happening. I think it's interesting to see what's happening in the smart assistant space. There's been less innovation there than I thought there'd be, but like they're kind of blitzing all devices at once right now, right? Like there's the like when my husband announces there's dinner, like literally every Alexa device in the universe just like blitz, like he parrots his voice out. And when we talk about notifications in my book, like there's more intelligent ways to do that, like figure out which devices heard me last, or use presence or something. So there's also examples of less sophisticated examples. So there's a question about where does privacy fit in all this? Excellent question. And you know, when I would give talks about voice user experiences in Europe, it's really interesting because there's this dichotomy of trust, and both are valid. So first of all, like anyone who's questioning having a microphone in their phone home, and they like absolutely like we should question the companies we work with, and that's why I love like Project Voice at Mozilla and like open source voice libraries. Like the more we can get other options out there, the more people will have that choice. Anyway, Europe trusts government and not corporations. United States trusts corporations, not government. And so when I would give talks in Europe, I get several folks being like, why would you trust a corporation putting a microphone in your home? And I'm like, it's an excellent question. I can see why you would think we are all crazy. And so I think part of it is the context thing. Part of it is understanding what your customers' values are, what their boundaries are, and whether or not you're providing like enough value to get over that hump. I thought the Echo Look, which I worked on, was going to be dead on arrival. And like we would get canceled before we even made anything, because I thought no one would want a camera where like it was designed for you using there were no camera devices that Amazon released. But when we talked to folks, like many of the folks I tested, and I was trying to set up the test so that like it made it sound like it was a bad idea to have cameras in the home, because I really didn't want to talk people into giving up their privacy rights. But they were like, this is really valuable to me, and I would and if I didn't like having it in there, I'd put a sock over it or something. It's like, oh, okay. So I think the privacy conversation is really important, and I think I talk in the book about like trying to minimize the amount of customer data you're passing between all these devices. But if you understand the value, you can come to a sort of an agreement with your customers. But it's also important to understand like the prevailing feelings in the region that you're working, because it can be a real regional thing too. Let's see. One cross-device experience that Carmen loves is Kindle books versus Audible audiobooks on phone versus Alexa reading that book for you. Ooh, really good example. So you're like on the phone, you're reading, you're connected to the internet, and so like the Audible knows exactly where you were and could just start picking up to you in a completely different interaction modality. And it's acoustic, it's speaking to you. You didn't have to tell it what to do. It managed your customer profile. And you had a contextual reason to move between those devices, and Amazon understands that and decided to track that part of your customer profile in a way that lets you move seamlessly between those devices. That's a really great example, Carmen. Thank you. Zozia says, you love doing the workshop with stakeholders, but what research should you bring to the workshop? What should you limit? I like doing a little bit of pre-work and saying like, hey, everybody, what do you know about? Like, let's like, in an email thread or a Teams thread or a Slack thread or something, like what work do you know about? Like just post the general shape of it. And then me as a facilitator, I can go through and get a sense of like, how detailed is this stuff? How old is it? Because what we're gonna probably do in the first phase is have people post it, like the things they remember from that research. I am of the belief that I wouldn't want to limit much, because I feel like if I limit it, it's going to come back and bite me. Like if marketing has research, somebody's going to use it later and be like, but you didn't take this into account. So if it exists, I'd love to get it like into the main channel so that we're all working together. But if everybody brings like a Library of Congress to a 2-hour workshop, that is logistically challenging. So it can be good to take in a couple of my shared understanding workshops, we did like a 15 to 20 minute like expectation setting meeting where we talked about what we thought existed for the team, and then we
Vou por aqui, não vou nem parar, então.
Okay, so we probably have someone's mic is not muted, but we will figure that out. On multimodal device experience often go across brands. How do you communicate with stakeholders when the best UX involves working with products from other companies? I don't know if I have a great answer to that question. I do think that taking a step back and showing people the scope of a customer's day is really important, showing those moves between products. That's a really tough one. To me, my next, if I was going to have that conversation, what I would want to know before I go into that conversation with the stakeholders is what are those stakeholders' motivations? How are they being rewarded? What are their goals? Because if I get it, they may react to me coming in and saying like, hey, our customers use this product in a couple of ways. They may say like, well, what we just should make the same thing. We should just build that now. And now I have to go talk them off chasing tail lights for a long time. So understanding a little bit of like where they're coming from and why may help me tailor the story a little bit better. So I feel like there's no silver bullet, but it matters a little bit on the situation. You talk in the book about how transparent you are about how smart the system is, so to level set expectations. Oveta Sampson, one of the interviewees in my book, she talks about this a bit because she worked on AI for IDEO, and they were talking about how transparent you are about AI. Is it like unethical to give the impression that the system is smarter than it is? And we do talk, I do talk in the AI section about being transparency about the system's capabilities being important. And that is one of Microsoft's AI. I forget what they specifically call them. Ruth Cook-Gill is one of the folks involved with a lot of that. The Microsoft AI guidelines, she gives a lot of talks that are great, but the transparency in what the system is capable of doing is really important. Both for people being able to consent to how their data is being processed, and so that they don't misuse the system or put too much trust in the system. But we still haven't cracked that nut either. Like wake words on these first party devices and the way they prevent recordings from going to the cloud. It's a really complex technical challenge, and like the way like it actually does it. So a lot of folks are like, well, it's listening all the time and Amazon's processing every word I speak. And I'm like, they're so frugal. I don't think they're ever going to want to process every word of human speech. And they've got like the whole technical secret sauce of the Alexa was making it so that they did not process all of human speech. But trying to convey that to the mass market is really like a super hard problem. And so I don't claim to have a great way to explain complicated AI in all situations, but it's definitely like an agreed upon thing. And we touch on it a little bit in the book, in the AI chapter. Yeah. Trying to think more about the best UX involves working with products from other companies question. There's a I think with cross-company partnerships, it's such an interesting thing. Like I was on the Amazon voice services team on Alexa too. So like I was the one representing Alexa on our partnerships with like Ford and Sonos and like Samsung. And those partnerships move so slowly. It's such an interesting beast. I don't know if the person who asked the question is also on those partnerships, but like, it's like a box. I wouldn't quite call it a Pandora's box, but it is a box you open with care. Because there's a lot of people at that table. Let's see, other questions. Let's see, these are good questions. So thank you everybody for those. Yeah, it's been an interesting journey this past year. I was joking with Tina and Julie before the session. Like people ask like, how's releasing a book going? And I've said, if someone like asks you to ship a book in the middle of a global pandemic and like an attempted government coup, maybe don't. But it's been hard on a lot of authors ever since because the supply chain's all weird and stuff. So I'm really grateful to folks who turn out and folks who are reading. So thank you, because I know that there's a lot of stuff and your brains are fried and there's just, it's tons. So thank you. I hope that this stuff resonates. I'm totally open to more questions and things as well. I'm going to be here till 1, but yeah, very passionate about these things, about hopefully getting us to a model where we're more inclusive. But I understand it's also expensive too. Like this is a long journey. finding a way to get the most out of the capabilities of all these systems. I find it so strange. Like I worked on Cortana voice for the desktop in 2014, and like we still haven't figured that out. How is it? Uh, and I don't think that I don't think it's because the idea is bad. Like we wouldn't have so many films where people are talking to their computers. Like if it wasn't something that, like, wouldn't have the bridge of the Starship Enterprise if it wasn't a thing that people didn't inherently want to do. It's just a hard problem that we haven't really solved yet. And I mean, I think the thing that killed Cortana on the desktop was open workspaces. And if we were like launching it in this environment, it might be a little bit different. And if we got spatial audio or something where like we only, or better headphones or something, I don't know. But it's fascinating to me that our devices have been capable of these things for so long, and we continue to use devices in the same way. And it's sad to me because 6 years of innovation, we could have been so much more inclusive. Like we could have made it so that like people who had auditory, like so visual disabilities were more fluidly using their systems without fighting with screen readers or systems like that all the time. But we'll get there, hopefully with the help of folks like you.
I just wanted to make one comment on the book reading. You just mentioned a little bit about accessibility. I was really impressed with the way that accessibility was just not just included in each section, but in the way you actually do your research and do your design work in all of the themes and phases. It was a real, I thought a much better way to write a book. I think sometimes accessibility comes as an add-on to certain concepts for design and design processes. And so just bravo that was done so well. Thank you.
Thank you. And I still feel like very much a student in that area too. And if you haven't read Design Justice, if you're interested in those spaces, like about like doing design research and being less extractive and getting deeper to those communities, it's an excellent book. And it's also like available for free by MIT Press and stuff. So if you're looking for next readings in that space, also very good. Yeah, that's, but it was, there's so much. And I'll admit too, like I've had a weird journey, and I found out last year I've been disabled my whole life and I just didn't know and was just powering through it. And I've spent a lot of time in physical therapist's office. And it's in Redmond, right? So like near Microsoft, and just hearing like the conversations of other people talking about how basically bad like bad copy paste issues sent them into physical therapy, right? Like it hurts you. Like it hurt me on it. I ended up injured on the job, like physically injured on the job and going on L&I because like I didn't have an ergonomic desk and did Figma too hard and woke up one day and I had T-Rex hands and I couldn't do anything anymore. And then hearing all these other folks the same thing, like, you know, yeah, I just go in between code windows all the time and copy pasting, and now I just have this pain in my thumb all the time and I can't. And there's folks who live with these things all the time, and then all of us are kind of on this slope where our bodies are sliding towards disintegration, and we as digital creators can slow the slope and also lift everybody who's kind of stuck there up on this at the same time. But I've had an awakening over the last few years, especially, and
For
several
sure.
surgeries.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Cheryl, for joining us today. Many thanks to Rosenfeld Media for the discount codes for the book. More information about Cheryl's book is available, and all those cool worksheets that she said. Let me just put this in here.
Oh yeah, let me copy and paste.
Here's the Idea Platz. Is that the right link?
Yes,
Is
that's
that
the right
it?
link. Thank
Okay.
you so much.
All right. Thank you. And thank
you
you,
have-
Tina. Yes, go ahead. Go.
I was just gonna say, if you have any feedback on any of those pieces, please let me know, because I do update those things based on feedback from my workshop participants and things along those lines. I'm Cheryl at ideaplatz.com.
Feedback is the lifeblood of designers for sure. And thank you very much, Tina from ServiceNow, for facilitating this Zoom. Thank you, everybody, for the good comments. If you haven't purchased the book yet, I am putting the link in here again with the discount code, and you are more than welcome to jump in on it. It's a very generous discount. If you want to, please do. Yes, support us. And if you would like to be included in Design Space's next event, feel free to subscribe to the Design Spaces mail list. That link is right here. So I can put that in there. So many links. And we hope to see you soon. Many thanks. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you, everybody. Nice to see you, everybody. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Tina. Thank you. Good meeting you, Alana and Carmen. Thanks for all the good questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, okay.